He survived 2 tours overseas, earned a Bronze Star, followed every rule for 6 to 2 years. But on this Tuesday morning in Cleveland, a bank told him he couldn't touch his own money. The letter arrived on a gray November morning, the kind of morning when Cleveland felt heavier than usual. Wind off Lake Erie rattled the loose aluminum siding on the duplex on East 93rd Street. Inside the small kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee clung to the air like a stubborn memory. James Carter stood at the counter, staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. His name was printed in stiff black ink, James A. Carter. Below it sat the logo of Mid-States Federal Bank, a place he had trusted for nearly 3 decades. He had opened that account in 1996, fresh out of the Army, back when his hands still shook in quiet rooms and sleep came in fragments. Back when he believed that if you did everything right, the world would eventually treat you right. James slit the envelope carefully, almost gently, as if it might contain something fragile. It did. The letter was short, clinical, cold. Due to unusual activity, access to your account has been temporarily restricted pending verification. That was it. No explanation. No phone number with a real person's name attached. Just a sterile paragraph and a signature that looked like it had been stamped by a machine. James exhaled slowly. He read the words again, then a third time. Unusual activity, he repeated to the empty room. He was 62 years old, a black man who had served his country. Former Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 2 tours overseas. He had a Bronze Star with a V device for Valor. It sat wrapped in a cloth inside a showbox in his bedroom closet. He never showed it to anyone, never talked about it. Some things you carry quietly. His account held his VA disability payments, his Social Security, the modest savings he had built over years of driving a city bus for the Greater Cleveland RTA. Early mornings, late nights, the same routes through the same neighborhoods. Passengers who nodded at him, some who didn't. There was nothing unusual about his life in the mall, unless surviving counted. James set the letter down on the kitchen table. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was just past 8 in the morning. The bank would be open by now. He thought about calling first, but he knew how those calls went. Automated voices, hold music that looped endlessly, transfers to departments that couldn't help. He had learned long ago that some things required showing up in person, looking someone in the eye, demanding answers face to face. James walked to his bedroom and opened the closet. He pushed aside old coats and reached for the showbox on the top shelf. He didn't open it, just touched it, felt the weight of it. The metals inside, the letters, the memories he had boxed away decades ago. There was something else in that box, too. A folded piece of paper with a phone number scribbled on it. A name he hadn't spoken in 15 years. Samuel Brooks, his former commanding officer. A man who had once told him that the uniform didn't protect you from everything. James closed the closet door. He wasn't ready to make that call. Not yet. This was probably just a mistake. A glitch in the system. Something that could be fixed with a simple conversation. He grabbed his jacket and his car keys. Before he left, he paused at the living room wall. A faded photograph hung there in a simple wooden frame. Fort Bragg, 1991. James stood in uniform, young and unbroken, his posture straight, his eyes clear, a man who still believed in things. He stared at that photo for a long moment. Then he remembered something his father used to say. Henry Carter had been a Pullman porter, worked the rails for 40 years, served passengers who wouldn't look him in the eye, smiled through insults, carried bags for men who called him boy. His father used to tell him that institutions don't need a reason to say no. They just need permission. James walked out the door and got into his old Chevy Impala. As he drove toward the bank, one question kept turning in his mind. Who gave them permission this time? Mid-States Federal Bank sat on the corner of Euclid Avenue and East 105th Street. All glass and steel, renovated to look modern and welcoming. The kind of building designed to make you feel like your money was safe, like you were in good hands. Inside, it smelled like floor polish and faint perfume. Christmas decorations had already gone up, though Thanksgiving hadn't yet passed. Silver tinsel hung from the ceiling. A small artificial tree sat in the corner, blinking with white lights. James stepped through the double doors and took his place in line. There were 7 people ahead of him. He counted. An older white woman clutching her purse. A young couple whispering to each other. A man in a construction vest checking his phone. Others who looked like they had somewhere else to be. James waited. The line moved slowly. Tellers smiled at customers. Transaction completed. People walked away satisfied. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 10 minutes. 15. 20. James kept his hands at his sides. His face calm. Patient. He had waited in longer lines. In worse places. Under hotter suns. Finally, it was his turn. The teller was a young white woman with a neat ponytail and a gold name tag that read Amanda. She smiled at him as he approached. A professional smile. Practice. How can I help you today? So, James slid his ID and debit card across the counter. I received a letter saying my account was restricted. I need to know why, and I need to withdraw $800. My rent is due Friday. Amanda took his ID, looked at it, typed something into her computer. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then she looked at the ID again, then back at the screen. Her smile tightened. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, she said, lowering her voice slightly. Your account is currently under review. I know that, James replied. His voice was steady. Calm. That's why I'm here. She tapped at her keyboard again. Her fingers paused. She glanced toward the glass-walled office behind her, where a man in a suit pretended not to watch. I can't release any funds until verification is complete. James leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to close the distance, to make sure she heard him clearly. That's my money. I earned it. Every dollar. I just need $800 to pay my rent. Amanda's smile vanished completely. Her posture stiffened. Sir, if you raise your voice, I'll have to ask you to leave. James blinked. He hadn't raised his voice. His tone had been the same from the moment he walked in. Measured, respectful, the way he had been taught, the way he had survived. But he recognized the tone, the quiet warning, the subtle shift. He had heard it before, in different uniforms, different buildings, different decades. James stepped back from the counter. Who can I speak to? He asked. The manager finally emerged from his glass office. Gregory Harlan, late 40s, crisp suit, polished shoes. He walked toward James with a kind of confidence that comes from never having to explain yourself. Mr. Carter, Harlan said, extending his hand. His grip was brief, professional. His eyes were polite but distant. They didn't reach his face. This is a standard procedure, Harlan continued before James could speak. Your account was flagged by our system. These things happen. Standard for who? James asked. Harlan's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But James had spent years reading faces. In combat zones, on city buses. He noticed. There have been recent changes in your account behavior, Harlan said smoothly. Large deposits. International transactions. The system flagged it for review. James almost laughed. I haven't left Ohio in 12 years, he said. I drive a bus. I cash my VA check. I pay my bills. There's nothing international about my life. Harlan nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're not really listening. The system flagged it, he repeated. Until corporate clears it, our hands are tied. How long? Could be a few days. Could be weeks. James felt something cold settle deep in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something heavier. The weight of being dismissed. Of being reduced to a number in a system that didn't see him. He straightened his back. Looked Harlan directly in the eyes. I served this country, he said quietly. I earned every dollar in that account. I followed every rule. Paid every tax. Did everything I was supposed to do. And you're telling me I can't access my own money. Harlan nodded again, already stepping backward, already done with the conversation. Thank you for your service. So, the words hung in the air between them. Hello, rehearsed. A phrase Harlan had probably said 100 times without ever meaning it once. James stood there for a moment longer. He thought about the bronze star wrapped in cloth in his showbox. The nights he had spent in places Harlan couldn't pronounce. the men he had lost, the pieces of himself he had left behind in the sand. "Thank you for your service." He turned and walked toward the exit. Security watched him the entire way. Two men in black uniforms, one by the door, one near the telestations. Their eyes followed James until he stepped back onto the sidewalk. Outside, the November wind hit his face. Cold, sharp. The sky was gray and heavy. James stood there for a moment, his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked back at the bank through the glass doors, at the Christmas decorations, the blinking lights, the people inside going about their business. He had done nothing wrong, and yet he was the one walking away empty-handed. By Friday, nothing had changed. His landlord, Mrs. Evelyn Price, left a voicemail that was polite but firm. The rent was due. She understood times were hard, but she had bills too. The pharmacy on Kinsman Road wouldn't refill his blood pressure medication without payment. The pharmacist apologized, said it was policy. The gaslight in his Impala blinked on like a warning he couldn't ignore. That evening, James sat alone in his living room. The TV played an old rerun of Jeopardy. He wasn't really watching. Contestants answered questions about things that didn't matter. He picked up his phone and dialed the bank's customer service line. After 4 to 7 minutes on hold, a voice finally answered. Cheerful, distant, somewhere far from Cleveland. "Thank you for calling Mid-States Federal. My name is Kyle. How can I assist you today?" James explained everything again. The letter, the frozen account, the bank visit, the manager who couldn't help. There was a long pause on the other end. "So, according to our records, your account is associated with an ongoing investigation." "Investigation into what?" "I don't have access to that information." "Who does?" Another pause, longer this time. "Corporate risk management." "How do I reach them?" Kyle hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "They don't take incoming calls." James closed his eyes. The line went dead. He sat in the darkness of his living room, the TV still flickering, the empty house pressing in around him. Somewhere, decisions were being made about his life, by people who had never met him, who didn't know his name, who didn't care about the flag on his porch or the medals in his showbox. And there was nothing he could do about it. Also, he thought. The days that followed felt like drowning in slow motion. James woke each morning with the same weight pressing against his chest, the same questions circling his mind, the same silence from a bank that held everything he had worked for. Monday came and went. No call, no letter, no resolution. He tried the customer service line again. 43 minutes on hold this time. A different voice answered. A woman named Patricia. She pulled up his account and said the same things Kyle had said. Investigation. Review. Corporate risk management. No timeline. No answers. James thanked her anyway. He wasn't sure why. Tuesday brought Mrs. Evelyn Price to his door. She was 74 years old, a black woman who had owned the duplex for over 30 years. She had known James since he moved in, had watched him shovel snow from her walkway without being asked, had accepted late payments during the months when the bus company cut hours. She stood on his porch with her arms crossed against the cold. "James," she said softly, "I don't want to do this." "I know, Mrs. Price. The bank says there's an issue with your account. They froze it. Won't tell me why." She shook her head slowly. Disappointment mixed with something else. Understanding, maybe, or resignation. "I can give you until the 15th, she said. "But after that, I've got my own bills. You understand?" James nodded. "I understand." She turned to leave, then paused. "My husband was Army too," she said without looking back. "Came home in '68. They treated him the same way. Different names. Same treatment." She walked back to her side of the duplex and closed the door quietly behind her. James stood on his porch for a long time. The wind bit at his face. The flag above him fluttered weakly against the gray sky. Wednesday morning, he drove to the pharmacy on Kinsman Road. The pharmacist was a young man named David. Polite, professional. He typed James's information into the computer and frowned at the screen. "Mr. Carter, it looks like your payment method was declined." "I know. My account is frozen. Is there any way I can pay cash and get a partial refill? David shook his head apologetically. For this medication, we need the full prescription filled. It's policy. I'm sorry. Policy. That word again. The same word Harlan had used. The same word Patricia had used. Policy was a wall built to keep people out while pretending to be reasonable. James left the pharmacy without his blood pressure medication. That night, the gaslight in his Impala finally won. He coasted into a station on Woodland Avenue and used the last $20 in his wallet to put fuel in the tank. It would last a few days, maybe a week if he was careful. He drove home slowly. The streets of Cleveland passed by in a blur of gray buildings and bare trees. He had driven these same streets for over 15 years, knew every pothole, every stoplight, every corner where trouble gathered after dark. This city had been his home for most of his adult life, and now it felt like a stranger. That evening, James sat alone in his living room. The television was off. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional rattle of wind against the windows. On the wall hung the photograph from Fort Bragg. 1991, a younger version of himself staring back. Straight posture, clear eyes, a man who still believed the world made sense. James looked at that photograph for a long time. He thought about his father, Henry Carter, the Pullman porter who had worked the rails for 40 years, who had smiled through insults and carried bags for men who saw him as less than human, who had come home each night with aching feet and quiet dignity. His father had died in 1987. Heart attack, quick and sudden. James had been overseas when it happened. By the time he got the news, his father was already in the ground. He never got to say goodbye. James closed his eyes and let the silence fill the room. The next morning, everything changed. A certified letter arrived just after 9. The envelope was thick, official. The return address listed a private investigative firm based in Arlington, Virginia, a company called Whitmore and Associates. James opened it carefully. The letter inside was typed on heavy paper. Formal language, legal terms, but the message was clear. Mr. Carter, your financial accounts have been flagged in connection with a federal asset verification inquiry. Failure to comply with document requests may result in permanent forfeiture of all associated funds. Please contact our office within 10 business days to schedule a compliance interview. Federal forfeiture. James read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words hit harder. He sat down slowly at his kitchen table. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from confusion, from the sheer impossibility of what was happening. He had never done anything illegal, never cheated on his taxes, never taken money that wasn't his. He had served his country with honor and come home to live a quiet life. And now the federal government was threatening to take everything he had. That afternoon, 2 men knocked on his door. They wore plain suits, dark colors, no badges visible until James asked to see identification. They showed credentials too quickly for him to read the details. One introduced himself as Mr. Lewis, the other as Mr. Finch. Lewis was tall and thin with graying hair. Finch was shorter, stockier, with a face that revealed nothing. "We just need to ask a few questions," Lewis said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "About what?" James asked. "Your time overseas." James felt something cold move through his body, a sensation he hadn't felt in years, the instinct that told him danger was close. He let them inside anyway. They sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he had read the letter that morning. Their presence seemed to shrink the room, to suck the warmth from the air. Lewis asked most of the questions. Finch took notes. "Mr. Carter, during your deployments, did you ever handle large amounts of foreign currency?" "No." "Did you ever receive compensation outside of official military channels?" "No." "Were you ever approached by contractors offering financial incentives?" "No." The questions continued. Kandahar, Fallujah, names of bases James hadn't thought about in decades. Names that still appeared in his nightmares sometimes. Places where he had watched friends die, where he had done things he never talked about. "Are you accusing me of something?" James finally asked. Lewis leaned back in his chair. His expression remained neutral. "We're just verifying information, Mr. Carter. Standard procedure." That phrase again. Standard procedure. As if destroying a man's life was routine. Verifying what information? Lewis glanced at Finch. Something passed between them. A silent communication James couldn't read. Your name appeared in a report, Lewis said carefully. An old report. We're just following up. What report? Lewis stood. Finch closed his notebook. We'll be in touch, Mr. Carter. Thank you for your time. They left without answering his question. James stood at his kitchen window and watched them walk to a black sedan parked across the street. They got in and sat there for a long moment before driving away. His hands were shaking. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through every moment of his military career, every deployment, every mission, every person he had served with. Around midnight, he got up and went to his closet. He reached for the showbox on the top shelf and brought it down to his bed. Inside were his medals, letters from commanding officers, a photograph of his unit taken 2 weeks before an ambush that killed 3 of them, memories wrapped in paper and cloth, things he never looked at, things he couldn't throw away. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper, a business card, actually, old and worn, the edges soft from years of sitting untouched. A name was written on it in faded ink. Samuel Brooks. James stared at that name for a long time. Samuel Brooks had been his commanding officer during his second tour. A black man from Baltimore. Sharp-eyed and fiercely loyal. The kind of leader who remembered every soldier's name. Who wrote letters to families when men didn't come home. Who had pulled James aside once and told him that the uniform was protection and target at the same time. They hadn't spoken in over 15 years. Brooks had retired, moved somewhere in Virginia, last James heard. They had promised to keep in touch. They hadn't. James looked at the phone number on the card. It was probably disconnected by now. 15 years was a long time. People changed numbers. Moved. Died. But something told him to try anyway. He picked up his phone and dialed. The line rang once. Twice. A voice answered. Older than James remembered. But familiar. Brooks. James hesitated, then spoke. Colonel Brooks, this is James Carter. There was a pause on the other end, long enough that James thought the line had gone dead. Then Brooks spoke again. His voice was quiet, heavy with something James couldn't identify. James Carter, I was wondering when you'd call. James felt his chest tighten. You knew? I knew something was coming, Brooks said. Sit down. James, we need to talk. James sat down slowly on the edge of his bed. The phone pressed against his ear, his heart beating faster than it had in years. What do you mean you knew something was coming? He asked. Brooks exhaled on the other end, a long, tired breath. It started about 6 months ago, Brooks said. I got a visit from 2 men in suits. Same type you probably met today. They asked questions about the old unit, about money, about things that happen overseas. What things? Contractor fraud, James. Millions of dollars that went missing during the war. Money that was supposed to go to reconstruction. Infrastructure. Instead, it disappeared into private accounts. James shook his head even though Brooks couldn't see him. I don't know anything about that. I know you don't, Brooks said firmly. But your name is on a list. An old report that was buried for years. Someone dug it up. Someone who needed scapegoats. The word hit James like a punch to the chest. Scapegoats. Why me? James asked. Why now? Brooks was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Careful. The men who actually stole that money are still out there. Some of them are powerful now. Connected. They've built careers and fortunes on what they took. And every few years, when someone starts asking questions, they need someone else to take the blame. And they picked me. They picked a lot of people like you, Brooks said. Lower ranking. Black. No connections. No lawyers. No one to fight for them. They count on people giving up, disappearing quietly. James closed his eyes. He thought about Mrs. Price on his porch, about the pharmacy that wouldn't fill his prescription, about the gaslight blinking in his car. about the bank that held his money hostage while strangers in suits accuse him of crimes he didn't commit. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "You fight," Brooks said, "and I'm going to help you." The next 2 days moved quickly. Brooks made calls, pulled strings, reached out to people he had served with who now worked in places that mattered. Lawyers, investigators, a retired colonel who had access to classified records. On the second day, Brooks called James with news. "I found someone who can help. A lawyer named Angela Morris. Sharp as they come. She's based in Columbus, but she's willing to drive up. Can I afford her? She's doing this pro bono." When I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate, said she's seen this pattern before. Angela Morris arrived in Cleveland the following morning. She was a black woman in her early 50s, gray streaks in her hair, reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She wore a dark blazer and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of courtrooms. She sat across from James at his kitchen table and listened as he told his story. The letter, the bank, the frozen account, the visitors, the accusations. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "This is illegal," she said flatly. "What they are doing to you is illegal. Freezing an account without proper notification. Moving funds without authorization. Harassment through private investigators posing as federal agents." "Those men weren't federal agents." Angela shook her head. "Whitmore and Associates is a private firm. They have no federal authority. They were trying to intimidate you into compliance, into signing away your rights." James felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. For days, he had felt helpless, confused, beaten down by a system that seemed designed to crush him. Now, for the first time, he felt something else. Clarity. "What do we do?" he asked. Angela opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. "This is a sworn affidavit from Colonel Marcus Webb, retired. He served on the oversight committee that reviewed contractor payments during the war. He confirms that your name was added to that report without any supporting evidence. Someone altered the records." "Who?" "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out." The next morning, James and Angela drove together to Mid-States Federal Bank. The lobby felt different this time. Quieter, tense. The Christmas decorations seemed duller. The artificial tree in the corner blinked its white lights at nobody. The teller recognized James. Amanda. She saw Angela beside him and immediately reached for her phone. Within seconds, Gregory Holland emerged from his glass office. He paled when he saw Angela's badge, her credentials, the folder she carried under her arm. "Mr. Carter," Holland said carefully, "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to come back," James replied. Angela stepped forward. "Mr. Holland, I represent James Carter in a matter concerning the unlawful restriction of his financial accounts. I'm requesting an immediate meeting with your compliance officer." Holland's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for James to see the fear underneath. "Of course," Holland said. "Please, follow me." They were ushered into a private office at the back of the bank. Leather chairs, a mahogany desk, framed certificates on the walls. The room smelled like expensive cologne and quiet desperation. Holland sat behind the desk, his hands folded in front of him. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began. Angela slid the affidavit across the desk. "This document states that Mr. Carter was falsely flagged based on altered records. It also states that Mid-States Federal Bank failed to conduct proper verification before freezing his account." Holland didn't look at the document. Instead, he sighed, deeply, the sigh of a man caught in something bigger than himself. "The issue is no longer internal," he said quietly. James frowned. "What do you mean?" Holland met his eyes for the first time since they had entered the room. "Your funds were moved." The words hung in the air. Angela leaned forward. "Moved where?" Holland swallowed. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Into a corporate holding account. Temporarily." Angela stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. "That's illegal. You cannot move a customer's funds without explicit written authorization." Holland shook his head slowly. "Not if it's authorized by someone with the proper clearance." "Authorized by who?" James demanded. Harlan looked at the door, then back at James. His face was pale, his eyes uncertain. By someone who made a call before you did. The room fell silent. James felt the floor shift beneath him. Everything he thought he understood about the situation had just changed. This wasn't just about a frozen account. This wasn't just about a flag report or a case of mistaken identity. Someone powerful had made a call. Someone who wanted his money. Someone who wanted him silenced. And they had moved first. Angela gathered her documents. Her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp. "We're not done here," she said to Harlan. "Not by a long shot." She turned to James. "We need to talk. Now." They walked out of the bank together, past Amanda at her station, past the security guards who watched them leave, past the blinking Christmas tree and the glass doors and the polished floors. Outside, the November wind hit James's face, cold and sharp. But this time, he didn't feel defeated. He felt awake. Someone had made a call before he did. Now it was time to find out who. That evening, James sat alone in his car outside his house. The engine was off. The streetlights hummed overhead, casting pale orange circles on the empty sidewalk. The flag on his porch fluttered weakly against the cold night air. He stared at his phone. A text had arrived from an unknown number 20 minutes ago. He had read it 7 times. "Stop digging. You got off easy." A second message followed seconds later. "Next time, you won't." James looked up at his darkened house, at the windows he had looked through for 15 years, at the porch where he had stood countless mornings, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Someone wanted him afraid. Someone wanted him to disappear quietly, to accept what had been done to him, to swallow the injustice and move on with whatever scraps they decided to leave behind. James thought about his father, Henry Carter, the Pullman porter who had spent 40 years smiling through insults, who had taught his son that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you let them. He thought about the men he had served with overseas, the ones who didn't come home, the ones who gave everything they had for a country that sometimes forgot them. He thought about Mrs. Price on his porch, giving him until the 15th, about the pharmacy that wouldn't fill his prescription, about Amanda at the bank who had accused him of raising his voice when he hadn't. He thought about all of it. Then he opened his phone and scrolled to Angela's number. He pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "James, I was just about to call you." "I got a threat," he said. Text message. Unknown number. Angela was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm but sharp. "Save those messages. Screenshot everything. This changes things." "How?" "Because now they've made a mistake. Threatening a witness is a crime, and it means we're getting close to something they don't want found." Over the next week, Angela worked tirelessly. She filed requests for bank records, subpoenaed documents from Whitmore and Associates, made calls to contacts at the Department of Justice, reached out to journalists who covered financial crimes. Colonel Brooks connected her with Marcus Webb, the retired colonel whose affidavit had started everything. Webb made his own calls, to former colleagues, to oversight committees, to people who still remember the contractor fraud that had been buried years ago. The pressure began to build. On the 8th day, James received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, polished and professional. "Mr. Carter, this is Linda Hoffman from Mid-States Federal Corporate Office. I'm calling to inform you that your account restrictions have been lifted. All funds have been restored. We apologize for any inconvenience." James sat in his kitchen, the phone pressed against his ear. "Inconvenience," he repeated quietly. "Yes, sir. We understand the situation may have caused some difficulty. As a gesture of goodwill, we're waiving all fees on your account for the next 12 months. James almost laughed. 12 months of waived fees. As if that could erase what they had done. The sleepless nights. The threats. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal in a bank he had trusted for 30 years. "Is that all?" he asked. Linda Hoffman paused. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly less polished. "We hope this resolves the matter, Mr. Carter." James ended the call without responding. That afternoon, Angela called with more news. "The investigation into Whitmore and Associates has been opened. Two of their agents are facing charges for impersonating federal officers, and the trail is leading somewhere interesting. Where? A defense contractor called Meridian Solutions. They were awarded billions in contracts during the war, and they had connections to the people who altered those old reports. The ones with my name on them. Exactly. Someone at Meridian made calls to multiple banks over the past year, flagging accounts, freezing assets, targeting men like you served overseas and had no resources to fight back. James closed his eyes. How many others? Angela was quiet for a moment. At least a dozen that we know of. Probably more. Most of them gave up, accepted the losses, moved on. But not me. No, Angela said. Not you. 2 days later, James walked into Mid-States Federal Bank for the final time. The lobby looked the same. Glass and steel. Floor polished and faint perfume. The Christmas decorations had been taken down, replaced by Valentine's Day hearts that hung limply from the ceiling. Amanda was at her station. She saw James approach, and her face went pale. She looked toward the back office, but Gregory Harlan was nowhere to be seen. James stepped up to the counter. I need to make a withdrawal, he said calmly. Amanda nodded quickly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed. How much, Mr. Carter? $800. She counted the bills twice, slid them across the counter in a neat stack. James took the money and put it in his wallet. Amanda looked at him. Her eyes were uncertain. Afraid? Maybe. Mr. Carter, I want you to know that I was just following procedure. I didn't mean to. James held up his hand. You were doing your job, he said. I understand. He turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused, looked back at the lobby, at the tellers and the customers and the security guards who had once watched him like a threat. No one was watching him now. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The February wind was cold but clean. The sky above Cleveland was pale blue for the first time in weeks. James stood there for a moment, breathing in the sharp air. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He had won something. But he knew the system that had targeted him was still out there, still functioning, still finding new victims. That evening, Colonel Brooks called. Heard you got your money back, Brooks said. I did. How does it feel? James thought about the question, about everything he had been through, about the nights he couldn't sleep and the days he couldn't think straight. It feels like a start, he said finally. Brooks was quiet for a moment. You know they'll pick someone else. They always do. I know. So what are you going to do about it? James looked at the photograph on his wall. Fort Bragg, 1991. The young soldier staring back at him. Straight posture, clear eyes, a man who believed in things. I'm going to make sure they don't do it alone, James said. Brooks let out a slow breath. Good man, James. Good man. They talked for a while longer, about old times, about the unit, about the men they had lost and the ones who were still fighting. When the call ended, James sat in the silence of his living room. He thought about the story that had brought him here, the letter that arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, the bank that refused to give him his own money, the strangers who accused him of crimes he didn't commit, the threats, the fear, the long nights of uncertainty, and the one call that changed everything. He had learned something through all of it, something his father had tried to teach him years ago. The system wasn't designed to protect people like him. It was designed to protect itself. And when it came for you, it counted on silence, on shame, on the belief that fighting back was pointless. But silence wasn't the only option. Sometimes, one voice was enough to break through. Sometimes, one call could change everything. James Carter had made that call, and he would make sure others could too. Stories like this happen every day. To those who served, to elders, to people who followed every rule and still got treated like suspects. As long as these stories exist, they will be told. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, you know what to do. Have you ever been denied something that was rightfully yours? Did anyone believe you? Share your story in the comments below.